Hello.
Hi.
I would like for you to say who you are and how we ended up here.
Yeah, I'm Zach Jean-Luc. Australia is back. But most people just call me Zach is back. And we're here because a decade ago you posted about how if someone bought you health insurance, you'd make them close. And I tricked you into doing that for only $5 a month.
For like 10 years.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably the same amount of money overall, but we're here because you're a person who helps me feel better about wearing clothes and colors.
Yes! Making art armor for my patron. Art armor is accessible futurism. It's an activist affordance. It's a living, durational performance. It's discarded people using discarded materials to build a world for each other. So yes, art armor. Made from 100% reclaimed materials, one backing layer, one hand-painted top layer, 2 layers of polar fleece batting in the middle, all quilted together. I don't have a lot of experience quilting, but I did this sort of meticulous parallel line style of quilting, mostly because I wanted it to look very crisp and intentional. And then they were run through my overlock machine. And then I used this custom, also recycled material bias tape that I made to bind all the edges in this beautiful sort of forest green. So usually draping comes sort of at the beginning of sewing a garment, but because I'm doing this sort of quilt as you go process that focuses on the materials instead of the shapes, I do draping at the end. So once all of the pieces are finished, I brought them over to my sewing doll, and I had all the measurements from Zach and a shirt that I knew fit them, and I just started sticking pieces together. This did take me a few tries of taking it apart and putting it back together, and then taking it apart again and putting it back together again. And then eventually, once I had all the pieces pinned where I thought they should go, I tried it on myself just to see how it moved, if there was any like spots I needed to fill in. Then I put it back on the doll and started the meticulous hand sewing process. Because I didn't want to add any extra visible seams to each of the pieces, I had to hand sew all of the edges of all of the pieces together. So once the pieces are on the doll, there's no more machine sewing. All of it's done with a running back stitch done by hand. And you are adopting this object so that it can become having a life.
Yeah, I want to give this some of my life and steal some of the things that it'll let me steal from others. I want it to be exciting and covered and turtly. I want to be able to protect myself when I'm out and about.
And so we have armor.
And so we have armor, art armor.
Art is a tool that we use to communicate who we think is valuable, who has power, who deserves the time and care of intricate handmade garments and beautiful oil paintings. Both who deserves depiction and who gets to be the artist entrusted with the highlighter of power. The performance of wearing and living with art armor lets us create together an environment that already values us, that already depends on the knowledge and expertise of disabled and fat and trans and neurodivergent. Marginalized people making art teaches the world how to see us. A big part of the design for one accessibility as action ethos is something made for one person is not just elite and rare and couture and hard to find. It can't buy this in the store. But creating art for one person helps us learn about how getting super specific about individual people and individual needs, individual bodies, individual sizes, those specifics become universal. And specifics teach us about who we are as humans. I'm happy it has a home now, and it's not just the idea.
Yeah, I am very excited about it. I'm excited to go find someplace to hang it up in my house to have it to put on. It feels like a thing that I would like a lot when I'm going outside and it's raining.
Yeah.
And I could put this on as a quilty top layer so I can be protected inside.
It's a blankie.
Yeah.
And I'm excited that art goes away from my house and has its own life, because that is definitely a thing I've really like struggled to manage. Get away.
Yeah, well, I will definitely take this out and show it to people, make them interact with it. I will tell them about my friend who makes these wonderful things. It helps me feel better about interacting with the world, but also about like my own internal sense of safety, the idea that I have this whole extra outside thick layer to keep me safe. I can just sink in a little.
Turtle mode. We talked about this earlier, but I'm really like averse to the idea of ownership. So we are together. I am giving you an object that you are hosting instead of doing an ownership thing where like you give me money, I give you objects for money.
Yes.
We're like trying to do other forms of art that aren't just you got money, give me the money.
Correct.
Because that kind of art kind of scares, or that kind of relationship with art scares me. It feels like I will lose all like connection and control over the thing, and I don't want to do that. I want to like build a relationship through the object.
I'm 100% with you on the not owning parts. That's the thing I often find hard about other things, other objects in my life. Yeah, so I'm excited about not owning things too. Plus, I'm excited about the idea that maybe at the end there's a scam where someone who does want to own things gives you a bunch of money about it.
Yeah, when it has life in it.
Yeah.
When it has been loved for a while.
Right.
Instead of when it's fresh off the presses.
Right.
It's not done yet.
When I feel like I have absorbed all the good feels out of it and given it my own feels and smoke smells, then someone else who doesn't know about any of that can own it and passively look at it.
I'm so excited for it to smell like smoke. The idea that like it even just the scent would like give away that it's had a life is like very exciting to me. I've had this idea a bunch of times over the years where I have lent art to people instead of sold art to them so that I retained ownership of the work. But people who didn't have financial access to contemporary art would be able to have art in their homes. Originally, I started calling it a lending library because that was sort of the idea. But I evolved the idea to become art museum from bed. And Art Armor is one way of doing that. Generally, in the past, I've made individual works and then loaned them to people once they were completed. So I would make sculptures like this one, and generally people would email me asking if they could buy a work, and instead I would say, "Hi, would you like to enter into a strange relationship with me where we email back and forth for years?" And I have 3 collectors now who are all in the lending library. None of whom have bought work from me, but they all are hosting or are caretaking work of mine. And Art Armor is sort of a new step in that process. Part of lending work was this idea that it would go out and have a life, and then when I wanted to exhibit it, I could bring it back into a sort of more formal art environment. But the interesting thing about Art Armor is that it is a garment. It will be worn. It will get stained. It will get tears. It will have smells, it will have a life, it will live in the world outside of maybe living on a wall, which a lot of the work that I've loaned so far has that kind of life. And so it's an experiment. It's an experiment to see like what happens to a piece when it is a living object in the world. Oftentimes in contemporary art, we think like the piece is done when the artist finishes touching it. Or sometimes there are kinds of artworks that have sort of physics interventionist kind of works, like a sealed acrylic container, like what happens to the moisture inside of this acrylic container over years and years? How does this object change over years and years? But I wanted to take it one step further and ask, like, what record do disabled, fat, trans, neurodivergent lives leave on the objects that we interact with. What traces do we leave behind on the objects of our lives? And art armor is a way for me to make objects for specific individuals in a way to value and document their lives through their interaction with the object. So, if you are interested in becoming a caretaker of a piece of art armor, please join the Patreon, come to the Discord, say hi, let's be friends. It's important to me that building an audience for my work doesn't just mean giant piles of numbers or even just interacting with large art institutions like I have in the past 2 years, but actually building relationships between objects and people, between specific objects and specific people. Being a caretaker of one of these objects does mean agreeing to be featured in my videos, be recorded, interacting with me over the long term, like agreeing to a kind of relationship that is a collaboration and not just an audience member. And I am so happy that Zach and I have developed the kind of relationship over time that allows for this kind of work to happen, because without the relationship, the work wouldn't exist. So, yeah. Thanks, Zach. I appreciate you being here. Thank you for participating in this arts with me.
Yeah. Thank you for doing this arts and surprising me with it and being an amazing human.
Yes! Accomplishments!